rather than try to top our previous historic mistakes, like the Smoot-Hawley tariff. That sounded pretty good at the time in 1930, when the idea was to buy American, but most historians agree it was a mistake, and it contributed to the Depression. There was the Alien and Sedition Act of 1798. Sounded pretty good at the time. We're going to keep these foreigners in our midst. They were mostly French then, from saying bad things about the government, but it offended all of our traditions of free speech. 1969, Congress enacted a millionaire's tax to try to catch 155 Americans who weren't paying any. That turned out to be an historic mistake, because last year it caught 28 million American taxpayers until we had to rush to change it. And just a couple more. There was the Catastrophic Coverage Act of 1988. That was well named, because it turned out to be a catastrophe, a congressional catastrophe. The idea was to help seniors deal with financial reverses, but seniors didn't like paying for it. They surrounded the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in Chicago, and now the leader of that group is a member of Congress. And then there was the luxury tax on boats over $100,000, another historic mistake, because it raised about half the taxes it was supposed to, and it nearly sank the boating industry, and it put 7,600 people out of jobs. So I would ask my friends from Oklahoma and Wyoming, it's going to be a lot harder for Congress, if they try to fix all this healthcare system at once, to come back and repeal it, than it was to repeal a boat tax. Don't you think that we ought to take the time to avoid another historic mistake?
I would answer my colleague from Tennessee is, as a practicing physician, what I see is the historic mistake is we're going to allow the federal government what care you're going to get. We're going to divide the loyalty of your physician. They're no longer going to be a 100% advocate for you. They're going to be an advocate for the government and what the government says. Because in this bill, the one that's going to come, has 3 different programs that puts government bureaucracy in charge of what you can and cannot have. Doesn't consider what your personal health, what your personal past medical history is, what your family history is. They're going to say, here's what you can and cannot do. That's called rationing. That's in the bill. That's coming. And that's the best health care system in the world in the name of trying to fix the smaller problems in terms of access. And it ignores the real problem. The real problem is health care in this country costs too much. And we all know that this bill doesn't drive down costs. It increases costs. So your premiums go up, your costs go up, your care is going to go down because the government's going to tell you what you have. So I think that's a historic mistake. And we've not addressed that. And I wonder what my colleague from Wyoming would think.
Well, I agree completely. As a physician practicing medicine, taking care of people in Wyoming for 25 years, I have great concerns about this bill, or at least what we know for sure is in it, which is $500 billion of cuts in Medicare to our patients who depend on Medicare, and that's a system that we know has gone broke. And that's why the front page story in one of the Wyoming papers, doctor shortage will worsen. It's going to be harder on rural communities and other communities around the country if this goes through. And we know that because the folks who've looked at the parts of the bill that we have seen, they have said that 1/5 of the hospitals in this country will be, if they're able to keep their doors open, will be operating at a significant loss 10 years from now. That's not the best future for healthcare in our country. But I had a telephone town hall meeting. People from all around the state of Wyoming could call in, ask me questions, and they said, what's in the bill? What's coming to the Senate? We don't know yet. We haven't seen that. And they said, well, when you find out, let's come home and have some more town meetings so we can have some input as to what we think. But that's what we ought to do as a Senate. We ought to say, what's in the bill? Let us go home. Let us see it. Let us share it with our friends so we know, because right now the American people, what they've seen of this part of the bill, this 2,000-page bill, the American people rightly believe that this will increase the cost of their own personal care.
My colleague would yield. Yesterday I asked the chairman of the Finance Committee to agree to a unanimous consent that in fact, at least 72 hours, that the American people get to see this bill, that the members of the Senate get to see this bill, that there be a complete CBO score so we can have an understanding. He denied that request. And that comes back to transparency. The American people expect us to know exactly what we're voting on. They expect us to have read what we're voting on. And his explanation was that I can't guarantee that. That presumes a certain level of perception on my part and understanding and delving into the minds of the senators that they could actually understand. What does understand mean? I mean, that's the kind of gibberish that the American people absolutely don't want. They want us to know what we're voting on when we get ready to vote on this bill.
Violation of the commitment that was made that for 72 hours any legislation would be online, not just for us to see, but for all Americans to see. And could I ask the senator from Kentucky again, the leader, is it not the perception now that this bill is probably going to be pushed through various parliamentary procedures, that the majority will try to force a final vote on this legislation no matter what before we leave? And isn't that in contradiction to what the American people are saying, that they want us, the majority want us to do nothing? Is this a responsible way to govern? Have then round the clock, the 24 hours, people on the floor, quorum calls, and all this kind of stuff. And really, there would also be no amendments allowed at that time for us to at least address some of the issues of this bill that begins cutting Medicare by $500 billion, increases taxes by $500 billion on January 1st, and in 4 years begins $1 trillion. Is this a process that the American people are not reacting to in a negative fashion, obviously by polling data? And by the way, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Wall Street Journal article entitled "Democrats' Blues Grows Deeper in New Poll and Support for Health Overhaul Wanes" be included in the record.
Without objection.
Well, I would say to my friend from Arizona, and with reference to the issue of the process, it's been a bit of a charade. In fact, a total charade.